teaching you the art of industrial real estate. This is On Air with Team Jensen.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to our first episode of On Air. We're pretty dang excited to be introducing this podcast and ourselves to the world. And so you have here myself, Kurt Jensen, and with me I have my father, Dan Jensen, and my brother, Stuart Jensen. And we are all industrial real estate folks here at Kessinger Hunter in Kansas City. And we are now launching On Air, the art of industrial real estate, in which we're going to inform you on just all things industrial real estate and keep you in the loop on things going on, and also teach you a little bit about what different industrial operators are doing here in Kansas City, what they're thinking about, and how they kind of view their growth and how it could impact really your future and everything that you do, from ordering things on Amazon to running to the store to pick up something you need at the hardware store. And, just excited to introduce a lot of those things to you today. But today, our first real goal is going to be interviewing Dan Jensen, who is an industry veteran, and he's one of our owners / principals here at Kessinger Hunter. And Dan, thanks for buying into the podcast with us and helping spearhead this as we're excited to bring it on.
Happy to do so. Happy to be here, and go Team Jensen, right?
And we grew that team last year with Stuart Jensen coming on board, and thanks for helping me not be the only brother here while our younger brother just works out on a vineyard and sells grapes for a living. So that will be a different industrial hobby that we actually will probably look to highlight at some point as well.
We might bring him on.
Yeah.
That's the other thing you didn't mention, was that our intention is to bring some of our friends and clients and introduce their businesses to people and let them know the roles they play in Kansas City and in what we do.
Absolutely. So our plan really is to go through and to Dan's point, we intend to bring on guests on a regular basis and highlight them and let them share with the world what they do and really kind of what their company does and how their company fits into, the day-to-day that you see out in the real world. And, our plan there is to interview those folks and just kind of talk through some of the dynamics they're seeing in the market, some challenges they're facing, some opportunities they're seeing, and really kind of talk about that and how it impacts the bigger scale. And then we'll kind of zoom out from there and talk about really, commercial real estate as a whole on from a global macro perspective. And then we'll really plan on zeroing into the Kansas City market as well and talking about Kansas City industrial and also just other fun facts and important things going on affecting the commercial real estate market. So, but diving into our first guest, Dan, we might as well start at the beginning. But so, how did you get into commercial real estate and into the brokerage and development world?
I just fell into it, luckily. As you know, your granddad was a salesman. He was a stockbroker for years. And so I grew up around a sales atmosphere, and it really never bothered me, or it was always of interest to me. And so what I did when I knew I wanted to go into some sort of sales, I got a business marketing degree at University of Missouri. And then when I came out of school,
it's a real tough degree to get at Mizzou.
Absolutely. Very selective. There's not many people that get in. But when I came out of school, in the neighborhood of It's a Small World, Greg Swetnam, who is now a partner of mine here at Kessinger Hunter, and we can circle back around to that. But when I came out of school, Greg Swetnam had been talking with my brother Rick, he and Rick had become friends at the university.
That's where it started.
At the University of Missouri, and Greg had been trying to talk to brother Rick about going to work for CB Commercial, which is where Greg was in commercial real estate. And Rick really had made the decision. He was comfortable. He wanted to stay the course. He'd only been there a couple of years. He wanted to stay the course. Unfortunately, in the Dunder Mifflin, he was in the paper business and still is to this day. But He should have switched. But so I reached out and spoke with Greg, and Greg put me in touch with a guy by the name of Reed Teeney. Reed Teeney, guy probably 10 years older than me, and was maybe 15, and was a beta at the University of Missouri. So went in and interviewed with him about, and I got all the kind of same answers that everybody else gets. Gosh, we'd love to hire you. It seems like a good fit, but gosh, you just don't have any experience. And it's like, well, how do I get experience if you don't hire me? So at that time, they used to give everybody an aptitude test for whatever reason, and I think they still do to this point. But
Did you fail yours?
I did. They came back and said, he came back, I did all the interviews and I did all the testing, and came back and he said, well,
Are you sure you graduated?
he says that the aptitude test tells me not to hire you because they don't think you're fit for this business. He says, I think they're wrong. Well, I think we agreed with him. I would think he was wrong. The tests were wrong too. But they originally hired me at CB Commercial. I was the data bank coordinator. And that was back in the day when companies used to track all of their own lease expirations and all of their own market data. And so I was in charge of that. And I had 3 people working for me in the summer that they were cold calling on all the tenants, and we kept files, hard files in a manila folder kind of thing. And I hated it. I saw everybody doing deals, and
Right.
I did not want to be the data bank. It used to be nicknamed the data bank dork, but
Doesn't sound very glamorous.
no, it was not. But it was an entree, and so
Right.
I was, again, I'm rambling, but I got. I did that for about 6 months. Then had the opportunity to go into a cube or start training in sales. I started mentoring. My mentors were 2 guys that teamed forever. David Hinchman, who just retired from the business
All right, with CB.
with CB, and Greg Owens. And Greg Owens passed away about 7 years ago, just out of the blue.
And this may be a dumb question, but CB Commercial is now CBRE?
Yes.
Okay.
Not a dumb question. They have had many changes. It used to be C&W, it used to be CB Commercial. And it used to be, believe it or not, owned by Sears.
Oh, I didn't know
At that time, Sears owned CB. It owned
I bet they wish
Allstate.
they still owned it.
Yeah. And then it's become CBRE. And the reason that CBRE is it merged with a company called an international company called Richard Ellis. So it's CBRE.
Right.
And a lot of people have come out of CBRE. So I trained under Owens and Hinchman in industrial, and was there about 1.5 years in production, and loved it, and was pretty good at it, contrary to what the aptitude test said.
That's when you were getting into actual
Yeah.
working deals and
Right.
transactions and stuff.
Yes.
Right.
And about 1.5 years into that process, I made a deal out in the Kansas Commerce Center where I was working on some deals with Chuck Hunter. And it was my biggest deal I'd ever made, that Johnson Controls plastic bottle deal.
Was it in the building there?
Building 16.
Okay.
Yeah. See, that's the funny thing for me. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but you guys go out in the market and are cutting your teeth and are cold calling and are talking about buildings. And in many instances, I have a very intimate familiarity with those buildings because I've done business in them or with them or helped create them.
Right.
And which is kind of fun. But made the deal.
So you and Chuck were on 2 sides of the deal?
Yeah.
Who repped who?
I repped the tenant, Johnson Controls, and Chuck and Craig Kelly represented the Kansas Commerce Center, which at the time was owned by Capers.
Was that your first introduction to Chuck?
And then Chuck ended up coming back to me and approaching me about going to work for Kessler Hunter and handling the development and leasing of the Kansas Commerce Center. And so that's how I got involved with that part.
So that specific project
Yeah.
is what kind of brought you over to Kessinger Hunter?
Right.
Oh, I did not realize that either.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Did you guys speculatively develop the stuff out at Kansas Commerce Center, or was it mostly build the suits?
Everything in Kansas Commerce Center was way too far out. Nobody would go out there.
So everyone considered it a big risk at the time.
Well, it seemed like it, but it was spec. Everything was
Right.
spec. And at the time, you had Pine Ridge East. They were starting to develop Pine Ridge West. The competition back then was Pine Ridge East and West, South Lake, which was Hugh Zimmer was developing it, and Kansas Commerce Center. Kansas Commerce Center was really the first of its kind where, there was high-end office in with the warehouses.
Right.
Historically, a lot of the industrial stuff you're used to doesn't have much high-end office around it, and people don't landscape a lot. And
Right. Well, that's the same reason why their operating expenses are about twice the cost as
astronomical.
everyone else's nowadays.
But those were built back in 85 to 95, and they're not functionally obsolete, but they're underutilized because they're 24-foot clear. They have ordinary hazard sprinkler systems.
Yeah.
And now we have 36 to 40-foot clear, and we have ESFR sprinkler systems. It's just night and day.
Right. The modern amenities are just far better.
Well, it's funny to think about that being far south. Now and
But to finish the question, everything out there was spec'd. And
I didn't really realize
except for we sold land to Winning Ways, who built their own facility, which is now Gear for Sport
that. Okay.
in the center.
Well, in Johnson, so Johnson Controls, I thought that building was pretty specifically built for them, and that's why there was all that power. Or did they just go in there and they had to bring in all that power after the fact to a certain degree?
It was under construction on a speculative basis when I brought them along, and the reason they went into that building was because they could get primary power and because they could get rail service to it, because they wanted to bring in the plastic resin for all the bottles they were making.
Yeah.
So there's another example of a deal we made because we had rail.
Yeah. And that's going to be, it's kind of been one of the key components as you and your team put together the Astra project. So, well, and so kind of jumping back a little bit and just a random question, did you get your real estate license before you started working at CB, or was it, how did that whole process work back then?
I got licensed as soon as, I guess, I kind of forget, but I got licensed. I was not licensed before.
Do you have your license today?
Yeah. Okay, truth be known, no, I did not. I don't remember exactly the details, but I was not licensed before I went to work for CB, so I must have gotten licensed that first few months.
In the process. Yeah. Well, so, and is that kind of your first deal you really remember, is the deal you did with Chuck in Johnson Controls at Kansas Commerce Center?
Oh,
or is
no.
there something else that
There's
sticks
other
out?
fun ones. I mean, like, for example, as the young guy in the office, we got some corporate feed that was like a 1,200-foot, I think I've told you guys this story before, like a 1,200-foot sublease over in some buildings we own now. That we're involved in the ownership of, off of Quivira and 85th.
Yeah.
And
Over there in Congleton area.
there was a sublease, and give it to the rookie. There was like 7 months left on it, 1,200 feet.
right.
I went around and knocked on the doors there, and ran into and met a little short guy named Leo Long, and it was Long Motor Corp. He's the owner of Long Motor Corporation, and he went over. He went over and looked at the space, said, "I'll take it." And he was in that growth mode, and just from there, that was my first little deal I made, and then I ended up staying involved with him and working with him, and I leased him 58,000 feet at 106th and Santa Fe Trail Drive, which was Clemens and Sillison's building.
Yeah.
It was a brand new construction. They took the whole building. And then I represented him buying that building on 108th Street, and I expanded it for him. So, again, moral of the story, you turn your nose up at a little 1,000-foot sublease that you won't make any money on, but you never know what relationship and opportunity you could create.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if it's not an initial home run.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Well, that's something you still teach us today, and we try and focus on. And so, very relationship-driven industry without a doubt. And, you want to work with people you like and enjoy. So,
Well, but I don't have a lot of choice because your mother's making me.
Right.
well, what's your Still kind of touching back on just kind of the history of things, but when did you, so you first kind of got into development then with the Kansas Commerce Center. And at that time, I mean, is that something did Chuck kind of work with you on
Yes.
that and kind of teach you the ropes? And
Yes, and handled most of it. I just got a taste of it at that point. Where I would say I really kind of cut my teeth on fee development, which again is when you don't necessarily take an ownership position in a property, you simply perform the services of a developer or construction management company for someone who needs a building. And where I really kind of cut my teeth on it was another name you guys will recognize, Randy Thrall.
yeah,
I was working with him at NASDAR. And again, I had been out cold calling, knocking on doors, ran across one of his local guys, and they funneled me to Chicago. And Randy and I started working together, and we were looking at existing buildings. They were looking for 100,000 feet. There weren't a lot out there. And it turned out that it wasn't there wasn't a building out there that met their needs because they had pretty specific needs. And
because they're doing all the ink stuff. Yeah,
solvent-based ink.
Yeah, which is extremely flammable.
Right. So you can't always just make an existing building work. So we were looking at stuff, and and what happened is, when you start looking with a client for buildings, there's one kind of compensation involved. And then if all of a sudden the building goes away and they're going to just buy a piece of ground and build their own building, it's a significantly different compensation. Okay.
Right.
And so what I found was I was working with people, and all of a sudden the building wasn't out there that they wanted or that worked for them. And so there was going to be a land sale instead of a building sale. And I kind of got patted on the head and sent away with a smaller fee. And then I found out that they'd start calling me and say, well, who should we be talking to about architecture? Who should we be talking to about incentives with the city? Who should we be talking to about general contractor? And they were asking me all of this information, and I was starting to provide more and more information and service to people like that. So I just decided I ought to package it, and I ought to create a scenario where I
turn it into a revenue generator.
I take care of that. I take care of all that, and price it accordingly.
Right. Well, that makes
Is it the
sense.
same, similar dynamic, I would assume, back then with development, where obviously you got to make it the dollars and cents of it all work, cost of construction and everything like that. But was there more of an appetite? Obviously development's been on fire the last few years, but that's been somewhat market driven. But with less product out there 30 years ago, was there more of an appetite for that kind of thing than maybe there even is now?
For build-to-suit stuff, yes.
Yeah.
There were fewer opportunities out there.
Like, as you mentioned, you were looking for 100,000 feet, and there's just nothing, you couldn't find much.
30 years ago, the industrial market, we could look this up, but I'll bet you it was 220 million square feet. And today we're about 325, 330. So there's been 100 million.
And what was considered a big
Oh my gosh.
a big bomber 30 years ago?
Oh, a big deal 30 years ago, 25 to 50,000 feet was a big deal.
Yeah, if you got to 6 digits on square footage, it was a monster.
But like a freestanding 100,000 square foot building,
Was a big deal.
those were few and far between
Yes.
out in the market.
Yes.
100,000 feet under one roof.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And remember, until 2007, when we did it, nobody was building these 600,000 foot spec buildings.
in Kansas City.
In Kansas City.
Right,
In Kansas City.
Right.
Well, and so obviously Chuck Hunter, yourself, Greg Swetnam, Bucky Kessinger hasn't been mentioned, but the name obviously Kessinger Hunter
Sure.
rings a bell. Who are some of the other players that things have obviously changed quite a bit in our market in the last 30 years. Who are some of the players that you recall from your early career that you kind of remember thinking fondly of, and people that you wanted to kind of replicate in your career, and just people that you remember having a strong reputation for, and things like that. And a lot of them still are names that people recognize today in our
Sure.
market, I'm sure. But
Sure. Well, no, I can tell you, and it was a great generation of people. Hugh Zimmer. Hugh Zimmer was a champ. He was a quality guy, ran a quality business, knew business, was always, a friend was family friend, but also friendly competitor. He was a developer. And I mean,
Did he and Chuck have a good
relationship?
relationship?
Yeah.
Because what I've noticed is obviously there's a lot more institutional and national players coming into our market, and it's kind of changed things. But the Hugh Zimmers of the world, the Chuck Hunters,
It used to be, back in the day, the institutions couldn't figure out our world because it was very conservative a marketplace, and it was tightly held. It used to be if there was going to be a building developed in Kansas City industrially, it was going to be Chuck Hunter, Hugh Zimmer, Barney Carbank, Kenny Block. Those really were the four. And what was interesting is they took turns, as silly as that sounds. If Hugh had a big spec building coming out of the ground, Chuck didn't go run and build something to compete with it.
right?
Interesting.
They kind of they
Yeah.
paced it.
They let the market,
And
It was almost like a give and take.
And
type.
it was, and
Yeah.
it was not uncommon for it to take a year to get a building leased up in this market. We didn't have the velocity. We didn't have
Right.
and it drove the institutions crazy, and because the institutions in Chicago and Dallas and Los Angeles and East and Central Pennsylvania, I mean, they get a building. If they break ground and get the building 25% under construction, they usually are used to having at least.
Right.
It just that was
before
the,
completion.
Yeah. So the Nationals really had a hard time with Kansas City, and that was the way it was for first 15, 20 years of my career. And then, back in 07, when the world kind of came alive it died. It died in 09, but the Great Recession. But we built that first spec in 07 with Sun Life. And really, once the Great Recession came and went, coming out of the Great Recession, things had changed. There was a new developer in town, North Point, and they kind of threw all the conventional rules out the window. They started developing Riverside, and they're building multiple buildings at once. They got hired on and replaced the Allen Group that got washed out there at LPKC, the Northern BNSF.
Would that have been after they saw some success with your 07 spec build?
Yeah, 'cause-
in the Kansas City market. I mean,
BNSF had done their land assemblage out south in Edgerton, and
did North Point kind of look at that as a success and be like, hey, we can do this here too?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think, but it just took off from there.
Right.
Well, and that building was first, and then Dan went and tied up a couple hundred acres with Sun Life to then do more of the same type of construction, same type of speculative development in Olathe.
Right.
And that's what ultimately ended up competing directly with LPKC when North Point was first getting going with that. And that was when you were an intern at Merritt General Contractors, and you were out
right.
on that site for Building B, where now you got S&S Activewear and 1A Auto over there. But yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy to think how much things have changed. In the time I've been in the business, the market's been on fire, and the national players have been extremely relevant in Kansas City. But for the majority of your career, it's really been a kind of a close to the vest, local market that local experts really kind of were able to keep the outside institutional investors out almost to a certain degree.
Yeah, and developers certainly not, if not also investors, but because investors can, but because we all worked with different institutional investors, but also, it seems like, we did a lot more back in the day, but, we would work with Kurt Matheson Scientific, Fisher Scientific, Appleton Papers, and we would do their real estate all over the country. We would represent them and go to the various markets they wanted to be in, and we would affiliate with a local SIOR
Right.
and would represent them. And in some instances, we actually built buildings for Curtin Matheson Scientific, which was a good client of ours that ended up getting acquired by Fisher Scientific, and
Right.
now they're, who's the group that's out there in that
Thermo Fisher.
Thermo Fisher.
Oh, that's Thermo Fisher?
Yeah.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're in the big building off, what is it, Renner and 116th?
that I also developed.
Yeah, who'd you build that for originally?
That was a spec deal that we did with TA Associates, and then it was sold by us to Great Point, which is now Washington Capital,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and they owned it for a number of years. And then along came Silpata, the silver jewelry company,
Right.
and they needed a warehouse, and they wouldn't lease it, but they wanted to buy it, so we sold it to them. And then they went broke. They sold their business to Avon,
Right.
Silpata, and then they went broke, and Avon ended up selling the business back to Silpata, but Silpata sold that building to Kenny Block, and that's how he got it.
Yeah. Now they got Thermo Fisher in there, and they were in there putting masks together and all that
Yeah.
good stuff during the
Yeah.
pandemic.
COVID was a boon for that
Yeah.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what COVID did for the industrial market too. It was pretty unprecedented. For a month there, it was, who knows what's going to happen. And then quickly it was pretty clear that it was going to create a huge demand and a huge reshoring and a lot of things that are just going to drive activity, we think, for quite a while.
Absolutely. We talked about this before. There's, the three components that the pandemic created was that you took an industry in e-commerce that was increasing annually, but at a very much more anemic rate
Steady.
and steady, and just put it on steroids. And it just, because people became much more comfortable with ordering something online because they had to, because they were stuck at home, they couldn't get out
To their doorstep, yeah.
But to your point, Kurt, we thought when this happened, everybody's staying home. We thought, I don't know if we're going to have any business to do for a while.
Right.
And it was just the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, I was scared to call people for a little while because, people had a lot bigger concerns, it seemed like at first, than when their lease expiration was coming up or anything.
But so
like
your
that.
e-commerce exploded during COVID. Also, we realized the latest and greatest warehouse and distribution technologies, supply chain logistics technologies of just-in-time inventorying is a wonderful thing when it works, and then when it doesn't, it's a problem, because we all saw companies where retail shelves were empty and companies couldn't deliver things because they didn't have product. So the other leg of the stool is that, okay, e-commerce is growing, they want more space. That created millions of square feet of demand. People were out of safety stock, they were out of warehouse surplus, and they realized, never again, we've got to start carrying more stock, especially if we're importing. We got to have more stock on the ground in the States so that we don't get caught like this again. So that created millions of square feet of requirements. And then the other is nearshoring and reshoring. For many years, when I was your guys' age, the big deal was offshore. Everything was going offshore. Right. Americans were losing manufacturing. They could do it more cost effectively somewhere else, and we'll truck it in, we'll ship it in. And that was the case for a long time. But what people realized through the pandemic, as well as, especially some of these defense sensitive issues like chips and some of the safety, even as simple as masks, things like that, all of that was getting made and manufactured in China. And there's just been a real mindset of we can't be that exposed again.
We can't be reliant on the Chinese government.
Right. Or any foreign government. We're going to be able to control it. So those three things, I really think, is why, and we've had this conversation before. Everybody always says it's different this time. This time, I think it is different. I think the rest of the markets, the office and the retail have been down in the dumps since the pandemic, and really haven't. I think retail's coming around a little bit. Office is getting a little better, but they've had a hard slug of it. And And I really don't see, even though we've seen prices go up on construction and has slowed some demand down, I still think there is going to be a reliable pace of product and demand in the marketplace for many years to come.
Yeah, no, and I just Kansas City specifically, I think, things have slowed down a little bit from the historical great years we had in 21, 22, but I think it's almost kind of a good thing. Things were over leveraged in the favor of the landlord and the favor of the seller. And really now there's more opportunity out there for tenants and buyers. And I think it's just a more balanced market, which just leads to
21 and 22 were not sustainable.
Right.
It wasn't healthy. I mean, when you've got tenants who you say, if this space works, you need to make an offer right now because it won't be here Monday.
Right.
That's out of whack, and
That's
not good for anybody.
It makes it difficult to make a quality business decision if that's what your options are.
Well, and kind of bouncing from obviously this, historically great years, record years for Kansas City industrial and the country. It's obviously one of the hottest times. What do you recall in your career, one or two kind of windows? When do you recall the toughest times, and kind of what were some of the challenges you were seeing then? And obviously the Great Recession. I mean, I even remember growing up, you had the big spec building sitting out there, and I remember you were having some nights where you weren't sleeping as much as you maybe were used to.
Right.
But just kind of some of those times. Is there a time other than the Great Recession that you recall too?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's cycles. Our business goes through cycles, and yes, it's different this time, but at some point, it's going to slow down even now with the big warehouse stuff. But when I first got in the business in '85, there had just been the tax law change where Congress had gone back and made a tax law change retroactive, which people had made investments in real estate based upon tax code that was law that they went back and changed. So it really really set the industry on its backside. And so for a while, I remember people saying, God, 85, what, you really want to get in the real estate business now? And naive, probably, youth, probably. But, my response was, gosh, I'm getting into it at 21, 22, and it's a down market. It's not going to be a down market forever. When it gets going, I will have learned the market and will be a participant in its uprise. And I was, and it did work that way. And then in mid-90s, there was a little bit of a slug where things, recession hit and people were, woe is me, we don't know what's going to happen. But I mean, it's always been a deal where if you keep your head down and keep pedaling, you get through it. I mean, again, you want to be conservative. You don't want to ever put so many chips on the line that if a bet doesn't work, it's not, you're not gonna survive.
How was it? I've always been curious, just pre-internet days and everything. How was new product blasted to the marketplace? Was it all mailers?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They would like.
And I know you'd actually go out with stacks of stuff, and that.
Well, they would mail leases.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
we'd overnight leases. So we made the 5 changes you want. We'll send it to you, and we would overnight it. And
the back and forth that would require.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and you guys remember when we were doing something else for another user or putting some list together on CoStar. Angie and I were laughing. Literally, those dot maps we used to make by hand.
Right.
You'd get the rub. You'd get the plastic and rub number 1 on the map where it was supposed to be, and it would coordinate with the brochure that you'd put number 1 on.
Which is all the reason those, I'm sure, tour books and all that stuff was that much more important at the time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Now you show up and there's usually a half dozen brochures people hand.
Right.
Or it's like, oh, I forgot the brochure. Here's it on my phone. You know, here's the.
Yeah. Well, and that was the other thing. It used to be that it was not uncommon to use someone like Papa, your mom's dad, to design a brochure.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And put it together, which now, Angie or Stephanie can do it in 10 minutes on their laptop or on their computer.
Right.
Right.
So it was very different.
Yeah.
I remember the first time the fax came out. where, you know, and you guys been a while, and it used to be heat sensitive paper that it would come out on a big roll, and you'd have to tear it off and cut it into pages.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was high tech in the day.
I won't even tell you, when I first, there didn't used to be copiers. There used to be mimeograph machines where you'd put a big piece of whatever it was, blue print on and you'd
Film or something.
and you roll it, and it would
Right,
it would
press
print
it
copies.
through almost. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I remember that when I was in school.
Yeah.
That's how they made copies. So yeah,
I still remember. I
Man,
still
you
love-
are old.
I am old. I'm telling you, man.
Well, and I do love this. Yeah, I like the story of when you were in grade school or middle school or whatever in typing class. And you're like, I'm never gonna have to know how to do this.
yeah.
It's like you sit at a desk every day.
I used to be a total turd. I'd sit there in typing class and I'd say, I am never going to use typing in my. I'm going to have a secretary that will type or do this or that.
Right,
I type
right.
every day.
Oh yeah.
I type every day.
Well, yeah, and one last kind of question on when you were getting started, but what was prospecting like, you know, before? Obviously nowadays we have so many different technologies and so many different tools and ways to reach, you know, a prospective client.
Do you really have to ask that? You know exactly how I prospect. Because I'm always telling you, get out, knock on some doors, meet people face to face. That's what I did. I would go out, I'd spend a day or two knocking on doors, taking cards, and until I got enough going that I had to spend time in the office to deal with it.
And then would you make phone calls off those cards when you were in the office and
Guys,
stuff?
the receptionist used to be a far more important position that did a lot more. Not that Anna doesn't do a lot to help, but I'm just saying, first of all, even when we had cell phones, they were car phones. They weren't cell phones. But people would call here at the office and you didn't have a direct dial. They'd call and they'd take a message. So I'd come in from being out knocking on doors or whatever, and I'd have 5 messages in my box that I'd take out, go sit at my desk and return the calls.
Right.
So, I mean, that was,
Right.
When I remember even, this was cell phone times once we were kids, but I remember being on vacations and every morning you'd call in and recreate your voicemail and say, this is Dan Jensen.
I remember
Today
that
is
too.
June, 15th and yada, yada, please, I'm out of town. Please give me a shout if you need anything.
right,
and that
yeah.
yeah.
And it used to, and again, you guys probably don't remember this, but long distance used to be expensive.
Right.
You'd get monthly, you'd get a long distance bill that was $150 for long distance calls. That's why people were always like, oh no, don't call, it's long distance.
Right.
I mean, it really was. And
Right,
now,
yeah.
You can call
You can call Europe,
Hawaii, Europe
from your cell
for
phone.
nothing.
Yeah. Right.
And then also when these first came out, these cell phones, they again charged you for the minutes too. So you were getting $150, $200 bills on them.
Right.
Whereas now you pay your lump sum and you're kind of,
Oh, they still gouge you though.
how would you know? You're still on
That-
your mom's and my account.
We can edit that out. Of this. I still pay for it, just indirectly. It's cheaper for everyone.
What are you laughing at?
cheaper.
You are too.
Yeah, thank you.
That's what they tell us.
At least I'm not married yet.
Throwing stones. All right.
I still Venmo mom for those. She still sends me the bill. I might delay my payment sometimes.
And occasionally she doesn't think to send you the bill.
Yeah.
Courtesy month here and there.
Exactly.
Yeah, there have been a few times where I've bought lunch and she's like, "Well, I won't send I won't send your phone bill." I'm like, okay. Well, no, I mean that kind of covers the history of what we wanted to talk through with your career. But I mean, are there any big deals that you'd want to touch on that were memorable or you think would be fun to share that you've worked on or worked through?
Oh, there's been tons of big deals and fun stuff, but I mean, it is funny that the nature of our business, because you spend years getting to know somebody and working to establish their trust and to make a deal with them, and then you spend a period of time, pick it 6 months to a year, where you're actually working on the deal, and then another 3 months later you get actually paid for the deal. It's kind of anticlimactic many times when you get paid because you've had so many different jolts along the way where you've kind of gotten it done. And it's, you know, I don't know, my first big warehouse lease is fun. You know, they're fun to sign. They're fun to finally get the deal done, to win. You know, we're in a competitive business. You want to win. You want to win for your client. No, but I still get a charge out of finding a new opportunity. I mean, that's why, again, I say get out there and knock on doors, because you know the feeling when you find something and you feel like, oh, this could work.
Well, you know, when the hit rate is as low as it is at times, it's invigorating.
Yeah, absolutely.
He actually talked to me.
He didn't throw me out.
Let's go.
And you learn real quick to just completely ignore no soliciting signs or
When you lower expectations, it's like, well, we'll see how this meeting goes. You know?
Well, and remember, my trick, and that is, you know, you're not going to walk out of there with a deal or a sale. Just always try and have a positive effect, whether you get a decision maker's name and number, or you're
on a fact finding mission.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But no, and you know, that's all fun, and I dig getting the opportunity to work with you guys. I want you guys to you know, be involved in stuff I'm doing, but I really get a charge out of seeing you guys chasing business and doing business. It's fun. It's fun to see it perpetuate, and I want to, you know, help you guys continue to grow in the business and take on more responsibility, and because that's good for you and that's good for Kessinger Hunter, and you know.
Well, we love working with you and being a part of the team. And I was kind of curious, kind of put you on the spot, but who's your favorite son to work with?
Charlie. He's in wine country, so that's an easy answer.
I can certainly say I've probably caused him less headaches at this point.
And he's only been here a year.
That's fair. Well, that makes sense. He should cause less headaches over a year than the years I've been here.
No, you're the wine connoisseur brother. He's the easiest to work with because he provides me a service and I send him money.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
What do you guys got planned for Father's Day?
Well, that's kind of for us to know and for you to find out, you know. We'll be golfing tomorrow. That'll be fun. Playing around and
absolutely.
What do you have planned, Stuart? You just had your second.
Yep, just welcomed baby number 2 a couple weeks ago. Getting about 90-minute stretches of sleep at a time. But I don't think there's too much going on Sunday. Probably some pool time and maybe a couple cold ones. But
I've always been a big fan of breastfeeding. As a father of 4, it was always something I couldn't do. So
I just know we're doing the occasional bottle right now, and so it's dishes are minimal, but that will change soon. So.
Well, I was always the one that would get up and get you guys and bring you to your mother, and then I'd go right back to sleep.
Yeah. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Watch her eat in the middle of the night? So
we probably should just stop where we are there.
Maybe
we'll both
so.
get in trouble.
We'll get in trouble. That's true.
Well, jumping back to kind of wrap things up, I mean, obviously industrial globally is slowing down, but I do think to our, kind of some of the points we've touched on, I think Kansas City especially, and really with the bulk product, I think there's still a lot of runway around the country really when it comes to industrial. And I mean, any feedback or input you would tell, prospects out there, industrial users, on what to expect for the next 6 to 12 months, is just as far as, what the market's doing and what we expect to see?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I think on a national scene, Kansas City is far more, people are far more cognizant of Kansas City than ever before.
That's for sure.
I really don't think there are major logistics decisions that are being made anymore without somebody looking at Kansas City. And Kansas City, even though the costs have gone up significantly,
relative to everywhere else,
relative to the market, to the coasts, relative to other markets, Kansas City is still a pretty inexpensive market.
Yeah, and that offers the greatest quarterback of all time in Patrick Mahomes.
That's true. And isn't he our guest next month? Yeah.
Maybe. If you might have to tune in to find out. Folks. Younger brother Charlie might be actually host. He's going to be up at not Catching Kelsey, the show.
Tight end
Yeah,
U.
that's going to be pretty cool.
Next week, isn't
tight
it?
end
Oh yeah, it is next week. But yeah, our brother Charlie, he's with Hill Family Estate out in Napa County. If you're ever looking to buy some wine or in the area, he is the estate host there. But he's gotten connected through the the Bella twins, which they're now not. They're the Garcia twins now, but formerly with WWE, and they are good friends with George Kittle's wife. And George Kittle's wife was at a tasting and got talking to Charlie, and next thing you know, Charlie's getting plugged into George Kittle and Kelsey, and they're talking about coming down, and now he's actually going to do a tasting with the Tight End University crew. And apparently they told him he needs to be prepared to spend a couple late nights out with them too. So I think they're
like
going to.
Greg Olson. And
Yeah, I was telling him, I was like, please, I will fly down there at my own cost. I will just stand there and I will do whatever you ask me to do. I won't, I just want to be in the room. But I don't think younger brother Charlie was interested in that.
Probably made the right decision.
But that is officially our first segment of On Air with Team Jensen. And thanks for listening in. And we sure hope you'll tune in in the upcoming weeks, as we're going to bring on some very interesting guests and some local leaders here in Kansas City, as well as from other markets around the country. And I'm excited to share, a glimpse into the industrial world and kind of what we see and do on a day-to-day basis, and how it really kind of grows the community we're in and kind of enables growth for the country for the future. So thanks again. Woo!